There are roads in this country that test your brakes. There are roads that test your patience. And then there are roads that test something deeper, your heart, your breath, the quiet places inside you where strength and fear live side by side. I've crossed a lot of miles in my life, drifted through countless nights on highways that felt like warm rivers of asphalt stretching forever, but nothing stays with you quite like a heavy mountain climb. You never forget the first time a grade feels too steep, the first time the air thins enough that your breath turns into slow clouds, the first time your truck groans like it's carrying not just freight, but everything you've ever been through. And the strange thing is, if you ask a driver what makes the hardest climbs unforgettable, it's not danger, and it's not struggle. It's that quiet moment right before the real work begins. When you look up at a dark line of mountains cutting into the sky and feel something shift inside you, something that whispers, "This is going to change you." I felt that whisper the night this story begins. The sky was a deep, velvet blue, fading into the kind of darkness that looks soft enough to touch. The highway curved gently beneath my wheels as my old Peterbilt hummed with warm confidence, the kind of steady vibration that climbed up through my boots and settled into my chest. The air outside was cool, mountain cool, even though I hadn't yet reached the base of the range. The breeze coming through the cracked window smelled of pine, cold stone, and a hint of wood smoke from some distant cabin fire. The stars were sharp, bright, scattered like silver nails hammered into black velvet. The moon hung low, riding just above the dark ridge ahead, casting pale light across the sweeping slopes that rose like sleeping giants waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to cross them. I watched those mountains grow closer with every mile, their outlines sharpening, their shadows stretching across the valley like reaching arms. The climb ahead was long, too long to see the end from where I was. I knew the pass. I'd crossed it once before, years ago, back when I was still learning the language of engines, and fear felt heavier than the loads I hauled. Tonight, though, it felt different. Still daunting, yes. Still massive. But there was something else in the air, some quiet energy that made the night feel alive, as if the mountain itself were awake, patient, and watching. The farther I drove, the more the road began to rise, subtle at first, just enough to make the engine's hum deepen into a low, steady growl. The rumble beneath my seat shifted tone, not struggling, just preparing, like a runner taking slow breaths before a steep ascent. The headlights spilled long golden beams across the asphalt, catching signs that glowed softly in the dim light. 6% grade ahead. Trucks stay in low gear. Chain area 2 miles. Use pullouts. Watch for wildlife. Each sign felt like a reminder whispered directly to me, not in warning, but in reassurance, as if the mountain wanted me to take my time, to breathe, to understand that strength isn't in speed, but in steady, patient motion. The cab warmed around me, wrapped in the familiar scent of diesel, old leather, a hint of coffee lingering from a cup I'd finished an hour earlier. The heater sighed quietly, brushing warm air across my hands as I rested them gently on the wheel. Every gauge on the dashboard glowed a soft amber, calm, steady, like small campfires lighting the way. If someone had looked in from the outside, they would have seen nothing but a lone truck drifting toward a wall of mountains. But inside the cab, it felt like entering a story, one written in diesel hums, in moonlight on chrome, in the steady heartbeat of a machine that had carried me through rainstorms, breakdowns, lonely deserts, and nights where the sky felt impossibly vast. The climb hadn't started yet, not really, but the night already felt heavy with meaning. I took a slow breath, drawing the cool mountain air deep into my lungs, feeling it settle somewhere quiet inside me. The road curved again, rising a little more. The engine note lowered another tone, like a voice dropping to a whisper. I shifted down gently, letting the RPM lift and settle where the truck liked it best, easing her into the kind of rhythm that mountains respected, steady, patient, unhurried. And as the first true incline touched the wheels, the thought came to me as clearly as if someone else had spoken it. Some climbs test your truck, but the real ones test you. I didn't know then how true that would be. I didn't know what waited higher up, how the engine would strain, how the air would thin, how the night would grow quieter and heavier until silence felt like a weight on my chest. I didn't know I'd meet other drivers up there, strangers who'd become part of the story in ways small and huge at the same time. I didn't know I'd face a breakdown that would stop me cold on the steepest part of the grade, or how close I'd come to giving up. I only knew that the mountain ahead felt alive, and that something inside me was waking up to meet it. And so, with the moon climbing above the jagged ridge and the road rising softly beneath my wheels, I began the ascent, unaware that before the night was over, I'd learned something about strength I couldn't have learned any other way. All I knew, right there at the start, was that the mountain was waiting, and I was ready to climb. The first mile of real climbing feels like stepping into deeper water. Not dangerous water, just deeper, where your movements have to change, where casual becomes careful, where the easy rhythm you've been keeping suddenly needs more thought. My truck felt it first. The engine's hum dropped another half tone, settling into that working register I'd heard 1,000 times before. Not strain, but focus, like a voice getting serious about the conversation ahead. I downshifted into eighth, feeling the transmission catch with a solid thunk that vibrated through the floorboards. The RPM lifted, the turbo whispered to life, and the whole rig settled into climbing mode. The road curved left, then right, following the natural contours of the mountainside. Each turn revealed another stretch of asphalt rising ahead, painted silver by moonlight, disappearing into shadows where the headlights couldn't reach. Pine trees lined both sides now, tall and straight, their tops lost in darkness. The air coming through the window grew sharper, thinner, carrying the clean bite of altitude and the deep, green scent of forest that never saw sunlight. I glanced at the temperature gauge. Still normal. Oil pressure steady. The engine was working, but not working hard. Not yet. The grade steepened. 6% became 7, then 8. I could feel it in my body, the way the seat pressed against my back, the way my coffee mug wanted to slide toward the rear of the cup holder. A sign appeared in the headlights. Steep grade next 12 miles. Trucks must use low gear. 12 miles. That was a long climb, even for a mountain pass. Long enough for the engine to heat up, for the transmission to work, for small problems to become bigger ones. I shifted down to 7th, then 6th. The truck responded without complaint, the diesel engine settling into a steady thrum that I could feel in my ribs. The first pullout appeared, a small gravel area carved into the hillside where trucks could stop if they needed to cool down or check their loads. I rolled past it slowly, noting the tire tracks in the gravel, the faint smell of brake dust lingering in the air. Other drivers had been here. Other trucks had needed that pause. The road curved again, and suddenly I could see how high I'd already climbed. The valley spread out below, dotted with tiny lights that looked like stars that had fallen and decided to stay. The highway I'd just traveled looked like a thin silver thread winding through darkness. It was beautiful, quiet, peaceful in a way that made me understand why some drivers talked about mountains like they were alive. But it was also a reminder. I was committed now. The only way forward was up. The engine temperature crept higher, still within normal range, but climbing. I could hear the radiator fans cycling on and off, working harder to keep things cool in the thinner air. I rolled down the window another inch. Cold mountain air rushed in, sharp enough to make me blink, clean enough to taste. It mixed with the warm air from the heater, creating little currents that danced across my arms. The grade steepened again. 9%. 10. I shifted to fifth gear, and the engine note rose to match the new demand. This was where the mountain stopped being polite. This was where it started asking questions. How well do you know your truck? How patient are you willing to be? How much do you trust the machine that's carrying you? The headlights caught something ahead, red reflectors, bright as rubies in the darkness. Taillights. Another truck climbing slowly ahead of me. I eased off the throttle, letting the distance between us settle into something comfortable. No point in crowding. Mountain driving was about patience, not speed. As I got closer, I could see it was an older Freightliner, probably hauling a heavy load. Its exhaust stack glowed faintly in the darkness, little wisps of black smoke curling up into the night. The driver was taking his time, keeping a steady pace, letting the engine work without pushing it too hard. Smart driving. Mountain driving. We climbed together like that for several miles, two sets of headlights cutting through the darkness, two engines working in harmony. It felt good to have company up there, even silent company. Then I smelled it, the faint, acrid scent of overheated brakes. Not mine, coming from somewhere ahead. The Freightliner's brake lights flickered on and off. The truck slowed, then pulled into the next pullout, hazard lights blinking orange against the dark trees. I slowed too, rolling down my window as I passed. The driver was already climbing out of his cab, an older man in a baseball cap, moving with the careful urgency of someone who knew exactly what was wrong. "You good?" I called out. He waved me on. "Just need to cool the brakes. Go on ahead." I nodded and continued up the grade, but the smell lingered in my nose, a reminder that the mountain was patient with those who respected it, but unforgiving to those who didn't. The road stretched ahead, rising into darkness, and I settled in for the long climb, knowing that somewhere up there, the mountain was waiting to test more than just my brakes. The mountain had a way of making time feel different. Miles that should have taken 10 minutes stretched into 20. The steady climb created its own rhythm, slower, deeper, more deliberate than the easy rolling of flat highway. I passed the Freightliner driver about 20 minutes later. He'd gotten his brakes cooled and was back on the road, climbing steadily behind me now. In my mirrors, his headlights looked like friendly eyes following at a respectful distance. The grade had leveled off slightly, maybe 8% instead of 10, but the altitude was starting to make itself known. The engine worked a little harder for each breath of thin air. The turbo whispered more insistently, spinning faster to push enough oxygen into the cylinders. I watched the temperature gauge climb slowly toward the upper end of normal. Not dangerous yet, but getting my attention. The trees pressed closer to the road now, their branches forming a dark tunnel that my headlights could barely penetrate. The air smelled different too, sharper, cleaner, with an edge of cold that spoke of snow on the peaks above. A sign flashed by. Elevation 7,200 feet. 7,000 feet. No wonder the air felt thin. No wonder the engine was working harder. At sea level, the same load would have felt light. Up here, every pound mattered. The road curved left around a massive outcrop of granite, and suddenly the world opened up again. To my right, the mountainside fell away into darkness, so complete it felt like looking into space. To my left, the rock wall rose straight up, disappearing into shadows above my headlights. I was truly in the mountains now, not approaching them, not climbing toward them. Inside them, surrounded by stone and sky, and the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. The engine temperature crept higher, still safe, but trending upward. I eased back on the throttle slightly, letting the truck find its own comfortable pace. That's when I saw the lights ahead, not headlights, but the orange glow of hazard flashers. Two trucks pulled over in a wide turnout, their drivers standing between them, talking in the cone of light cast by a flashlight. I slowed and pulled in behind them. The night air hit me like a cold slap when I opened the door, sharp enough to make my eyes water. The altitude was real up here, thin enough that just walking from the truck to where the drivers stood left me slightly breathless. "Evening," I said as I approached. They turned, two men, one about my age, the other older, both wearing the weathered look of drivers who'd seen a lot of miles. The older man held the flashlight. The younger one had his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Radiator hose," the younger driver said, nodding toward his truck, a red Kenworth that looked like it had been well maintained. "Burst about a mile back. Been climbing too hard, I guess." The older driver shook his head. "Mountains'll teach you patience whether you want to learn it or not." I walked over to look at the damage. Green coolant pooled on the gravel beneath the truck, steaming faintly in the cold air. The burst hose dangled like a severed artery, one end still clamped to the radiator, the other hanging loose. "You got a spare?" I asked. The younger driver shook his head. "That's the problem. Thought I did, but what I've got is too short." I walked back to my truck and checked my emergency kit. Every mountain driver carries extras: belts, hoses, clamps, the things that can strand you if they fail at the wrong time. I had a radiator hose that looked like it might work. "Try this," I said, handing it over. The three of us worked by flashlight and headlamp, our breath forming clouds in the thin air. The work was slow. Everything was harder at altitude, and the metal was hot enough to burn fingers even through work gloves. But there's something about working together on a cold mountain night that creates a kind of fellowship. We didn't talk much, just handed each other tools, held lights, shared the quiet understanding that out here, drivers looked after each other. When we got the new hose installed and the cooling system refilled, the young driver tried to pay me for the part. I waved him off. "Pass it forward," I said. "Next driver who needs help." He nodded, understanding immediately. That's how it worked on the road. Today I help you, tomorrow someone helps me, and somehow it all balances out. The older driver clapped me on the shoulder. "You've got a good climb ahead still. This is just the easy part." "How much farther to the top?" I asked. "About 8 more miles. Gets steeper too. Some stretches hit 12%. 12%. That was steep enough to make things interesting. Steep enough to separate the well-maintained trucks from the marginal ones. We parted ways there, 3 trucks pulling back onto the grade in single file. The Kenworth's engine sounded healthier now, the temperature gauge back where it belonged. But the older driver's words stayed with me as I shifted down for the steeper sections ahead. This is just the easy part. The road rose into darkness ahead of me, and I settled into the patient rhythm the mountain demanded. Steady pressure on the throttle, eyes on the gauges, trust in the machine that had carried me this far. Somewhere above, the real test was waiting. The older driver hadn't been joking about it getting steeper. 2 miles past the breakdown, the grade hit 11%, and I could feel my truck lean into the work like a draft horse pulling a heavy load. The engine temperature climbed steadily now, not dangerously, but with the kind of persistence that made me check the gauge every few seconds. The radiator fan ran constantly, its whirring audible even over the deeper growl of the diesel. I dropped to 4th gear, then 3rd. The RPM climbed, the engine working harder but staying within its comfort zone. The truck had been built for this: heavy loads, steep grades, thin air, but it still had limits. The trees thinned out as I climbed higher, giving way to scrub brush and bare rock. Occasional patches of snow appeared in the shadows where the sun never reached, glowing white in my headlights like scattered pieces of the moon. The air coming through the window was cold enough now to make me reach for my jacket. When I breathed, small clouds formed and dissipated quickly. The altimeter on my dash read 8,400 feet and climbing. That's when I saw him. Another truck pulled over in a turnout ahead, hood up, steam rising into the night air like smoke from a campfire. The driver stood beside his rig, hands on his hips, staring at the engine with the kind of stillness that meant trouble. I pulled in behind him and stepped out into air so thin and cold it made my lungs ache. The stars above were brighter than I'd ever seen them, sharp as pinpricks in black velvet, close enough to touch. The stranded driver looked up as I approached, a man about 50, wearing a company uniform and a baseball cap. His truck was a newer Volvo, clean and well-maintained, the kind of rig that shouldn't have problems. Overheated? I asked. He nodded grimly. Temperature spiked about a mile back. Had to shut her down before I cooked the engine. I looked at the steam still rising from under the hood. How long you been stopped? 20 minutes, maybe. Still too hot to work on. I walked around to look at his setup. Heavy load, probably close to his maximum gross weight. The kind of freight that made every grade a challenge, especially at altitude. What you hauling? Steel beams. 80,000 pounds gross. He shook his head. Dispatcher said it was a milk run. Nobody mentioned I'd be climbing mountains. I almost smiled. Every driver had stories about dispatchers who'd never been behind the wheel, who looked at maps but didn't understand what the contour lines meant. First time over this pass? Yeah. You? Second. First time was years ago, in daylight. This is different. We stood there in the cold, thin air, waiting for his engine to cool enough to diagnose the problem. The silence was profound. No traffic, no wind, just the tick of cooling metal and the sound of our breathing. You know, he said after a while, I've been driving for 15 years, and I never really understood what other drivers meant when they talked about mountains being alive. But standing here, he gestured at the peaks around us, barely visible as dark shapes against the stars. I get it now. I knew what he meant. There was a presence here, something in the thin air and the vast silence that made you feel small but not insignificant. Like the mountain was aware of you, watching, testing, but not unfriendly. After another 10 minutes, the steam had mostly stopped. I helped him check the cooling system with a flashlight. The radiator was clean, the hoses looked good, the coolant level was fine. Fan clutch, I said, pointing to the radiator fan. It's not engaging properly, not pulling enough air at low speeds. He nodded, understanding immediately. At highway speeds, the ram air through the radiator was enough to keep things cool. But climbing steep grades at low speeds, you needed the fan to pull air through. Without it, the engine would overheat every time. I can limp it to the top if I take it easy, he said. Maybe find a shop on the other side. Want some company? I can stay behind you. Make sure you make it. He looked surprised, then grateful. You don't have to do that. No schedule tonight. Besides, mountains are easier with company. We checked his coolant level one more time, made sure everything was tight, then climbed back into our respective cabs. The cold air had left my fingers numb, and it took a moment for the heater to chase the chill away. The Volvo started up with a healthy rumble, but I could see the temperature gauge in his cab through his rear window. It would be a delicate balance, enough throttle to maintain momentum, not so much that the engine overheated. We pulled back onto the grade together, two trucks climbing through the darkness at barely 20 miles per hour. The engine in front of me worked steadily, not laboring, but not loafing either. My own temperature gauge had crept higher during the stop, but now that we were moving again, the airflow brought it back to normal. The thin air made my engine work harder, but the slower speed helped everything else. The grade steepened again, 12%, just as the older driver had warned. The Volvo ahead of me slowed to 15 miles per hour, then 12. I could see the driver hunched over the wheel, eyes glued to his gauges. We climbed like that for another 3 miles, two engines working in harmony, two drivers sharing the burden of the mountain's test. When the grade finally eased to 8%, I saw the Volvo's brake lights flash once, a signal of relief. In my headlights, I could see his temperature gauge had stayed just barely in the safe zone. He'd made it through the worst of it, but we weren't to the top yet. The road stretched ahead into darkness, and somewhere up there, the mountain still had lessons to teach. The summit felt like a promise that kept moving further away. Every curve revealed another stretch of climbing road. Every crest opened onto another grade. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, the mountain began to change around us. The scrub brush gave way to bare rock and patches of snow that no longer looked temporary. The air grew so thin that even talking required extra breath. My altimeter read 9,200 feet, higher than I'd ever driven before. The Volvo ahead of me was holding steady, temperature gauge hovering at the edge of normal, but not crossing into the red. The driver had found his rhythm, just enough throttle to maintain momentum, brief coasts where the grade allowed it, patience where it demanded more. We passed a sign that made my heart lift, summit 2 miles. 2 miles. After climbing for what felt like hours, the end was finally in sight. But those would be the hardest 2 miles yet. Mountain passes save their steepest sections for last, as if testing whether you really deserve to cross. The grade steepened to 13%. The Volvo slowed to 8 miles per hour, and I matched his pace. At this altitude, in this thin air, there was no point in rushing. The mountain would take as long as it took. That's when I saw the lights behind me. Another truck, climbing fast, too fast for the conditions. His headlights grew larger in my mirrors as he approached, and I could hear his engine screaming even over the sound of my own. He pulled out to pass, and as he went by, I could see it was a young driver in a newer Peterbilt, running hard and hot. Steam was already starting to rise from his hood, but he seemed oblivious to it. "Easy, son," I muttered to myself, knowing he couldn't hear me. The young driver pulled in front of the Volvo and immediately started pulling away. Within a minute, his taillights had disappeared around the next curve, engine echoing off the rock walls like thunder. The Volvo driver and I exchanged thoughts through our CB radios for the first time that night. "You see that?" came his voice, tired but amused. "Yeah, he'll learn. Think he'll make it." I considered that. Depends how much coolant he's got. We climbed in companionable silence after that, two experienced drivers taking the mountain's measure while a younger one charged ahead to learn his lessons the hard way. 15 minutes later, we found those lessons waiting in a turnout near the summit. The young driver's Peterbilt sat steaming like a geyser, hood up, the driver standing beside it with the defeated posture of someone who'd just had physics explained to him personally. The Volvo driver pulled in first. I stopped behind him, and we both climbed out into air so thin and cold it felt like breathing needles. The young driver looked up as we approached, barely 25, wearing the kind of confidence that experience hadn't yet tempered. "Overheated?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. He nodded, embarrassed. "Temperature spiked right over that last ridge. Had to shut her down." The Volvo driver walked over to look at the engine. "How much coolant you lose?" "Most of it, looks like. Hose blew somewhere back there." I checked my emergency supplies again. I had coolant, but not enough to refill a completely empty system. The Volvo driver shook his head. He was running low himself after his own cooling problems. "Tell you what," I said to the young driver. "We'll give you what we can spare, get you enough to limp to the other side. There's a truck stop about 10 miles down from the summit." His face brightened with relief and gratitude. "I can pay you. Don't worry about it. We've all been where you are." The three of us worked in the thin, cold air, sharing coolant, checking hoses, making sure everything was tight. The young driver's engine was sound, just a victim of inexperience in mountain physics. As we worked, he told us it was his first mountain crossing, first time in anything steeper than the rolling hills of Ohio. The dispatcher had told him it was just another highway. Nobody had mentioned the grades, the altitude, the way thin air could turn a routine haul into a lesson in humility. "Mountains don't care how new your truck is," the Volvo driver said as we finished up. "They don't care how much of a hurry you're in. They just care whether you respect them or not." The young driver nodded, understanding visible in his eyes. "I won't make that mistake again." We got his cooling system functional, not perfect, but good enough to reach help. As we prepared to leave, he shook both our hands. "Thank you," he said simply. "Both of you. I don't know what I would have done up here alone." "That's why we don't travel alone," I replied. "Not in country like this." We pulled back onto the grade for the final push to the summit. The young driver followed at a sensible pace, his earlier urgency replaced by the kind of caution that keeps engines cool and drivers humble. The last mile seemed to take forever, but finally, gloriously, the road leveled out. A sign appeared in my headlights. Summit elevation 9,847 feet. We'd made it. All three of us. I pulled into the summit rest area. A small parking lot carved into the mountaintop with a few picnic tables and an incredible view that was wasted in the darkness. The other two trucks followed, and we sat there for a moment, engines cooling, breathing the thin air of success. Through my windshield, I could see the road beginning its descent on the other side, a long, winding ribbon disappearing into the valley below. The hard part was over, but as I sat there, Feeling the mountain's presence all around me, I realized something important had happened on this climb. Not just the mechanical challenges, not just helping other drivers, something deeper. I'd learned that strength isn't about pushing through difficulties alone. It's about recognizing when you need help, offering help when you can give it, and understanding that some challenges are meant to be shared. The mountain had taught all three of us something different, but the lesson was the same. We're stronger together than apart. The descent began gently, almost apologetically, as if the mountain wanted to ease us back into the lower world gradually. The grade dropped to 6%, then 4%, winding through curves that opened onto views of distant valley lights twinkling like scattered diamonds. The air grew warmer as we lost altitude, though it would be miles before it felt truly thick again. My ears popped occasionally as the pressure changed, a reminder of how high we'd climbed and how far we were coming down. The three of us descended together, the Volvo in front, me in the middle, the young driver in the Peterbilt bringing up the rear. We kept our spacing respectful, engines in low gear, Jake brakes muttering as they controlled our speed down the long grade. The CB crackled occasionally with brief exchanges, long curve ahead, or watch the guardrail here. The kind of quiet communication that happens between drivers who've shared something meaningful. As we descended, I found myself thinking about the climb, not just the mechanical challenges or the thin air, but the way three strangers had become a team without planning it. The way experience had guided youth, the way shared difficulty had created trust. The young driver's voice came over the radio. "Thank you again, both of you. I learned more tonight than in 6 months of driving." "That's what mountains are for," the Volvo driver replied. "Teaching lessons you can't learn anywhere else." The truck stop appeared in the distance, a cluster of lights in the valley, looking as welcoming as a harbor to sailors who'd weathered a storm. The sign read, "Pete's Mountain View Truck Stop, Fuel, Food, Repairs." We pulled in together, 3 trucks finding adjacent parking spots as naturally as old friends choosing seats at a familiar table. The young driver immediately headed for the repair shop to get his cooling system properly fixed. The Volvo driver and I walked into the diner together. The warmth inside felt luxurious after hours in the thin mountain air. The diner was nearly empty, just a waitress reading a paperback novel and an older driver hunched over coffee and pie at the counter. We took a booth by the window where we could see our trucks. The waitress brought coffee without being asked, understanding that mountain drivers needed warmth more than words after a hard climb. "First time I've made that pass at night," the Volvo driver said, wrapping his hands around his mug. "Always heard it was different in the dark, but I never understood what that meant." I nodded. "Everything's more serious at night. More personal, somehow." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping coffee and watching late-night traffic move past the windows. The young driver appeared eventually, grinning with relief. His cooling system was fixed, his confidence restored by the combination of a working truck and hard-earned wisdom. He joined us at the booth, and we shared one of those conversations that happen after difficult experiences. Not dramatic retellings, just quiet reflections on what the night had taught us. "I always wondered why the old drivers talked about mountains like they were alive," he said. "Now I know. Up there, you can feel it watching you, testing you. But not trying to hurt you," I added, "just seeing if you're paying attention." The Volvo driver smiled. "And whether you're smart enough to accept help when you need it." We finished our coffee as the eastern sky began to show the faintest hint of gray. Dawn was still hours away, but the night's deepest darkness was behind us. Like our climb, the hardest part was over. When we parted ways in the parking lot, there were handshakes and genuine thanks. The young driver was heading south, the Volvo driver continuing west. I had a few more hours to drive before my destination, but I felt no urgency. The mountain had taught me patience, and I wanted to carry that lesson a little further down the road. I climbed back into my cab, started the engine, and listened to it settle into its familiar idle. The truck felt different now, not just because we'd descended to thicker air, but because we'd accomplished something together. We'd climbed higher than either of us had been before, and we'd helped others do the same. The highway stretched ahead, mostly downhill now, winding through forests and valleys toward the distant sunrise. I shifted into gear and pulled back onto the road, leaving the mountain behind, but taking its lessons with me. As I drove through the gentle curves of the descent, the events of the night replayed in my mind, not as dramatic moments, but as quiet confirmations of something I'd always believed, that the road connects more than places. It connects people, experiences, and the parts of ourselves that only emerge when we're tested. The dashboard clock read 4:17 a.m. The world outside my windows was still dark, but peacefully so now, without the intense weight of the high country. The stars were fading as the sky lightened almost imperceptibly in the east. My eyelids grew heavy, not with fatigue, but with contentment. The kind of tiredness that comes after meaningful work, after challenges met and overcome, after discovering that you're stronger than you knew. I found a rest area 20 miles down from the pass, a quiet place beside a small stream where the sound of running water mixed with the soft tick of my cooling engine. I parked under a single lamp that cast gentle light across the empty lot. The silence here was different from the mountain silence, warmer, softer, touched with the promise of dawn. I climbed into the sleeper, pulled the curtains closed, and laid down on the narrow bed that had become home on so many nights like this. The mattress held me with familiar comfort, shaped by thousands of miles and hundreds of stops just like this one. The blanket still held warmth from the heater, wrapping around me like the memory of the mountain's lessons. Through the thin walls of the sleeper, I could hear the stream murmuring over rocks, a gentle counterpoint to the occasional distant rumble of traffic on the highway. The sounds blended together into something that wasn't quite music, but wasn't quite silence either. I thought about the young driver, probably getting his first real sleep after his mountain education. I thought about the Volvo driver, carrying his load safely down the western slope. I thought about all the drivers who would cross that pass tomorrow, and next week, and next year, each one learning their own version of the lessons the mountain had to teach. My breathing slowed, matching the rhythm of the stream outside. The events of the night settled into memory with the gentle weight of something important preserved. The strain in my shoulders eased away, replaced by the deep satisfaction of work done well, help given freely, challenges overcome together. The first birds began to sing somewhere in the trees beyond the rest area. Not the full chorus of dawn, just the tentative notes of early risers testing their voices against the fading darkness. The sound was soft, musical, peaceful. My eyes grew heavier with each breath. The stream whispered its endless story to the rocks. The truck creaked once as the metal continued cooling, a sound so familiar it felt like a goodnight wish from an old friend. And in that gentle space between waking and sleep, I felt the mountain's presence one last time, not looming or threatening, but approving. like a stern teacher nodding at work well done, acknowledging that the lessons had been learned and would be carried forward. The last thought I remember was how good it felt to rest after truly earning it. Not just from the physical effort of the climb, but from the deeper work of becoming someone worth the mountain's respect. Sleep came slowly, gently, like fog settling into a peaceful valley. And in that sleep, I dreamed of endless highways stretching toward distant peaks, each one offering its own lessons to those patient enough to listen and strong enough to climb. That's where my story ends tonight. If you'd like to hear more from the road, hit subscribe and rest easy, my friend.